Every mile drives the economy, from the drivers who fill the shelves to the professionals, investments, and innovations that support it. Behind it all are decisions made every day, under pressure and at scale. Hosted by leaders from across the industry, this is Cents Per Mile, insights that drive better decisions. A CD Life production.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Season 6, Episode 12 of the Cents Per Mile podcast. I'm today's host, Tom Albrecht, the Chief Revenue Officer at Reliance Partners, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Karen Smirchek of Viria Trucking out of Wisconsin, and Kevin Hall, the CEO of CDL Life. Guys, welcome back to today's podcast.
Awesome to be here, Tom.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about new technology and a continued theme of self-certification and all of the changes that are going on in trucking. So what a great combination. Look forward to today.
Well, I'm really excited about today's topic, which is about ELDs, or the electronic logging devices. There's a lot of change in the air, and we've got a special guest that I'll introduce in a moment. But first, I want to remind our audience that they can access this podcast, as well as all previous ones, at the centspermile.com podcast. We're also available on all of the normal socials, YouTube, etc., and Apple. And today's special guest is Jeffrey Farrington. He's the president of Assured Telematics. Jeffrey, welcome to today's podcast.
Hi, Tom. Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
Well, I tell you what, we've got a lot to dive into. And, our audience knows about some of the bigger ELD providers, Samsara, Geotab, Verizon, Motive, et cetera. But there's still 1,000 ELD providers. And one of the reasons why we wanted to have you on the show is you're kind of a mid-sized one, but you're also certified in Canada. So that tells us that you're serious about the business, because compliance in Canada, it's cumbersome and it's expensive. So with that as an opening, why don't you just tell us a little bit about Assured Telematics, who you are, the number of subscribers, the whole ball of wax.
Sure. Yeah. So we were founded in roughly 2009. So we've been in the business for a while, well before the mandate went into effect. Sitting at about 100,000 active subscribers per month. That number was larger prior to the last 12 to 18 months, but we've seen a significant drop off in established carriers, specifically small carriers. Honestly, just because of the cheating that's being allowed to happen, which has ramped up significantly over the last roughly 24 months that we've seen. But our core product, our core focus is the ELD. So that is where the majority of our manpower is. Obviously, we have additional offerings as well, but that's really our core product, because we are all in, for safety as it relates to the transportation industry.
Before we get into too many questions, I know for a fact that you've told me that at one point you had 77,000 ELDs as part of your network, and you're 55,000 or thereabouts. What's been the influence of cheating that has brought that number down?
Yeah. So, at max, at some point, we were probably 125, 130,000 top. And then we've seen a significant drop off from that, just depending on what's going on in the market. Some of it could be closures, legitimate, companies going under or getting out of the market. But what we've really noticed is that, and it's pretty brazen of the carriers to tell us so, but a lot of them are leaving and are telling us they're leaving because we won't allow them to manipulate the logs. So while we've seen, a wash in terms of, additions and losses, we've seen a significant loss, probably about 20%, specifically for the fact that we will not allow them to manipulate logs like they've been doing in the past with other providers. So when we do get them on and they realize that they can't do what they did with other providers, that's when they leave, or they're getting essentially offered to leave, to move over now. And so even long time established customers that we've had for years will essentially leave us and say, we've loved the relationship, but you guys won't allow us to manipulate, so I've got to go somewhere else.
That seems like yes, ouch. Yeah, that seems like a common theme. A few weeks back, we talked about the bad acting carriers who are, not following the rules, hiring the bad drivers or the cheap drivers or whatever that is. Last week, we spoke with Andrew from CVTA. It was all about training schools and CDL schools and how, it's rampant with bad actors in that. And this is just yet another example of just that theme, right? Just allowance of people that are bad actors, not doing the right thing, not following the rules. And that goes back to a self-certification question, right? At the end of the day, self-certifying, what does that produce if there's no oversight related to that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think self-certification is something that early on was not an issue, but it has been over the last several years. So I'll give you a good example. So when the ELD mandate came out, there was obviously a rush for people to get into the business. It grew to over 1,000 different providers on the ELD registry in the United States. It has stayed above 1,000 since the implementation. Now, we have seen some enforcement from the FMCSA, especially with this new administration, where they've gotten to the point where they start delisting ELD providers, which they've done more in the last 6 months than they've done in the last 6 years. So that's positive. But the issue is there's 1,000 of them. And, we talk about chameleon carriers or people jumping, DOT to DOT. It's kind of the same thing with ELD providers, because when there was no initial verification from the FMCSA and anyone who wanted to do it simply logged on and created the new ELD provider, what we found was that a lot of providers are out there and they've got 100 different listings on the FMCSA ELD registry. So it's not even a scenario where they've got to apply and get a new one. It's already there. It's not necessarily monitored. They may not even have any drivers using that certification, but it's listed as a certified ELD. So what we're seeing is that when they do shut somebody down, all the ELD provider is doing is just changing the name of the application and using one of the ones that's already certified. Now, to the FMCSA's credit, they have not approved any new ELD providers in the last 6 months, 8-9 months. So they've really gotten tight on it, but the issue is the ones that exist. And obviously manpower is an issue, and they just don't have the manpower to go through it. It is a very, very tangled web, as you guys can imagine.
Let's add some color to that number. How many ELD providers are certified in Canada?
So if you look at individual ELD providers, multiple registrations taken out of context, 41 is the number.
41 versus 1,000, over 1,000 in the United States. And as a carrier, similar to what you just said of companies leaving you because they can't manipulate a log, we have that same commentary in a customer telling us what we should be able to do on a load. And I'm saying I can't legally do that. So clearly I'm operating at a higher cost per mile with a driver that takes a 10-hour break, things, such as that. So it's definitely impacting the carriers doing it right.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what you will see, there's really two sides of this, right? There's the ELD side and there's the carrier side. And we met with Secretary Duffy and Derek Bars a couple months ago in their offices in DC. And one of the things that I laid out for them was kind of that scenario. You've got ELDs and you've got carriers. Well, if you fix the ELDs, it stops the carriers. If you're just targeting the carriers, you're still going to have the bad ELD actors. And they're going to roll them right back up, sign them right back up. But if we get to a point where we have a third-party certification like Canada, that's when the problem starts getting fixed, and it's going to help businesses like yours, because you're going to get the cheater carriers out of it. They're not going to be able to stay in the industry not making double or triple or whatever else a carrier who's running legally is going to make. So I think it fixes a lot of the problems.
Jeffrey, I think what I heard you say is that if we can fix the ELD problem, especially the self-certification, that will be the single biggest action that will be a disincentive for the cheaters, the fraudsters, the non-compliant to potentially think about leaving this industry. Is that correct?
I think that is exactly correct. Yes.
I mean, isn't that really what ELD started to do? Isn't that really what it was supposed to do, is to make sure that everybody was logging up correctly and the regulations were in place?
And so you guys have seen, I'm sure, that OOIDA fought pretty hard against the ELD mandate because of privacy and other things. And then one of the things a couple years in, and especially now, that they've said, well, if you look at the data, ELD has not made the roads safer, which if you look at statistics, that's true. But that's true because it's actually easier to cheat with an ELD than it was with paper logs. I mean, you had to have a couple degrees to figure out, if you're running dual log books with paper logs, and make sure you didn't trip up over yourself. With an ELD, if I'm running with a fraudulent ELD provider, as a carrier, all I have to do is call them and say, hey, I need more time. And they'll go and reset the last 7 days and say, okay, you guys didn't drive. No problem. You're ready to go.
And I've spoken with roadside inspectors who have looked at that log, and by the time they go from looking at that log, seeing that there's an event that would be out of service, they bring it to their car and it's been reset. And that's I want to explain that ghost driver problem is, that when this driver runs out of hours, they replace it with a new driver that has a fresh logbook. One of the regulations is talking about eliminating offshore dispatch for trucking companies. Do you feel that this whole thing around the fraudulent ELDs and ghost drivers is really the root of offshore dispatch, or do you feel like that's happening onshore as well?
That's a great question. And I'm not sure that that the main cause is offshore. I obviously there are legitimate purposes for using offshore. We know labor's cheaper. We know that, some companies over there have people that are dedicated and just have more knowledge on certain things. So I think there are legitimate use cases for it. But we do see a lot of manipulation from offshore. We also see a lot of manipulation from, here in the US, from domestic as well. And there are hot spots for it, obviously. I mean, there are certain areas that are more than others. And, you'll see 6 different ELD providers registered in the 5 mile radius. I mean, those are type of giveaways where you're like, this is a little suspect. So there are ways to identify it. Another way is just retail cost. So if you look at the average cost of an ELD, you're talking somewhere between $20 and $40 a month per truck or per driver, depending on how they price it. If you go out and look at some of these ELD providers and they start at $100 a month, that's kind of an immediate red flag to say, that doesn't make sense. The ELD is almost a commodity at this point. Why would I pay somebody $100 a month? And in some cases, we've seen it up to $300. And we have screenshots of this where they'll email them and say, hey, for $100 a month, you guys can get on with us where we offer great flexibility when it comes to editing logs. They don't come out and say,
features.
We have all these new features that nobody else has. Come check us out. Only $300 a month. What a deal.
Trucks run on diesel, but America runs on truck drivers. Every day, they keep shelves stocked, businesses moving, and our economy alive. With nearly 60 million views and 2.9 million followers, this is where drivers live. If you are looking for drivers, they're at CDL Life.
I want to go back to the paper logs. I remember that it was a tough transition into that. But let's face it. I mean, you're cramming down this mess. I mean, this mess of ELDs that's out there. You're cramming it down people's throats. And yeah, they knew that it was going to be a mess, right? And it has come out to be a mess. And so I'm always trying to focus on the driver side of things, and that's not an easy thing to deal with. Whether you just think of if you're a driver and your ELD is now no longer usable. Now you have to switch to a different one. You have to switch to a different one. And even I don't know if you were in the early days of ELDs were not very user friendly, right? Like they've come a long way, obviously. But talk a little bit about that from the driver's perspective. And
well, I'm sure you guys both have seen this. I mean, just like you said, when it first started, there was heavy pushback from the driver pool. I mean, they didn't want to do it. I think it's flipped now. I think if you told drivers they had to go back to paper logs, they'd lose their minds because the amount of time it saved them is significant. And I think the people that are using it legitimately have gotten used to it at this point and are like, you know what, it is easier. I admit it. But again, to your point, it's brought this huge tangled web. And how do you unravel it? And personally, and this is what I told Secretary Duffy and Derek Bars when we were up there, it's the third party certification. Now, it's not just like Canada. Canada got some of it right, but they also got some of it wrong. So there are ways that they can fix this. Now, is that going to be something that happens quickly? Well, I wouldn't put money on it.
Well, so Jeffrey, let me run with that because yes, the FMCSA has shut down a number of ELDs in the last 12 months. I think it's less than 100, but at the rate that they're going, it may take decades to get through the 1,000 ELDs, maybe not decades, but years and years and years that the industry cannot afford to waste. So why don't they speed up the I guess, the certification of who the third-party companies are, because they could probably get to these 1,000 ELDs faster than the government and their limited resources. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's the right path. I think that it's easier said than done, obviously. I mean, when you look, and obviously technology has changed, but when you look at what Canada did, they basically started in June of 19 and said, here are the rules, we're registering it, here's the deal. They didn't have their first third-party approved person until October of 2020. Now, their enforcement goes live in June of 21. So we're saying in 8 months, they have to essentially register these ELD third-party providers. Well, they didn't get their first certification done until July. So just to go back to those dates, June of 21 is when enforcement started for Canada, and they didn't have an actual approved ELD provider until July of 21, a month later. So they way underestimated the amount of time that it was going to take to validate the third-party certifiers, and then for the amount of time that it took for the ELDs to be certified by the third parties. So if we started today, 12 months is hopes and prayers. There's just no possible way. But I do think that there would be a big move forward if they just announce that it's coming. I do think that would get us in the right direction.
Sorry, in today's world with AI, I mean, not saying that AI needs to be the ELD. There's obviously functionality, but from a validation perspective, I mean that could happen in days. That's not a 36-month project to build some sort of certification component that looks at these ELD software and validates what's actually happening within that.
So you and I didn't talk about this ahead of time, but that's exactly what we have and what we have built for ourselves. So we send every single output file every single day for every driver and every truck through our AI system that basically validates that output file and gives it a grade and says, this looks great, this looks great, this looks great. And so what it allows us to do, if any bugs are found or if a decimal point's moved over or something like that happens, we know it ever before the record is actually even sent to the carrier. So we're aware of that. So we have that tool in place. That's something we've offered to the FMCSA to say, we can do this now. The problem is those records only get submitted during the roadside inspection or during an audit. So you're not having a trail of every day, every driver, every truck. And I think that's where Canada got it wrong too, because they are auditing and they do have ongoing surveillance, but they don't have a daily record of what's happening with the miles. So again, to your point, I think AI can do that at this point. Technology from 2019 to now, significantly better. I do believe that the best path forward would be to follow the truck and have a daily record submitted to some type of repository where it could apply, logic and say, okay, well, if he was here, he couldn't have been here. Why did these logs disappear? That's what they need. And that's what we're kind of pitching for. Is we get privacy is an issue, but that's why you follow the truck. You can always make new drivers and try to cheat the system that way. But the device for ELD providers that are legitimate has to be connected to the truck, and it pulls the VIN number automatically. So follow the truck. As long as you know where the miles are in the truck, you fix the problem, but you've got to have that daily record, if that makes sense. I think that's pretty clear.
For our audience, part of how we got in this mess, and I didn't realize this until talking to a government official earlier this year, is when the ELD mandate was established back in 2017, the government did not want to anoint sort of a monopoly or at least an oligopoly of 7 or 8 or a dozen companies. And so they allowed the market to be free fall, and self-certification was part of that, but it ultimately created a bigger mess. And I think the other thing is when you look at the history of business, not just trucking, but scores of industries, when things become done electronically, it really opens the door to fraudsters. Look at banks and cybersecurity. Back in the old days where ledgers were kept with paper, you had to go in and actually physically rob a bank. Well, we saw the same thing here. First of all, drivers had to decide, did they want to have 2 logbooks? So their conscience. And then they had to understand the complexity, as you suggested, Jeffrey. And so once we had electronic logging devices, it allowed basically cheating at scale.
Yeah, I think that you nailed it. That's exactly correct.
So give the audience a
More
little bit of
rampant today than it was then.
Yeah, it really
Yeah,
is. It's
right.
crazy.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
was designed to fix opened the door to fraudsters. Jeffrey, give us a little insight, even if the US model ends up being different than Canada, but just the cumbersome process. I think you told me over 500 things were assessed during the testing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, yeah, the testing process that's established in Canada is cumbersome and costly. We started in 2021. We were the first US based company to be certified in Canada. So, we took it seriously from the beginning. It's cost us over $1 million over the last 5 years. And it's ongoing costs. We have monthly surveillance costs that we pay every time that we register a new device, or we have a different piece of hardware that has to be certified as well. So it is a very stringent process. There are 500 plus tests for each individual device. And they're not things like, can you log in and does it take you to the right place? It's more along the lines of, if an edit's made on a log from yesterday, how does it affect 6 days ahead of time? And what does it do to the clocks? Are all the clocks recalculated? So it's very complex testing. It's not the simple stuff. The simple stuff is in there, but it's not a big piece of it. Again, which is a great framework. It's a great starting point for the US. And most of the laws, you all probably know this, most of the laws from the ELD in the Canada and the US are the same. There are a few small changes in terms of number of days or the time frame, but generally they're pretty close. So I do think that they could use a framework that's already in place in Canada and make some adjustments to it and do this pretty quickly.
I'm absorbing all of the conversation that all the words we've spoken so far. And I guess I want to put this together for our guests, is that really what this means is there's trucks running fraudulently, and with every rejected ELD, it's impacting capacity. What is your best guess on the percentage of trucks that have been running non-compliantly on a phony ELD?
So I can tell you that based on what we know from the ones that have left us percentage wise, plus what we're seeing with some of our competitors or some of the people that we're in contact with. And this number is going to sound staggering, but if I had to personally guess, I think it's a third.
Wow. So what does that do for capacity and rates for our shippers? Like, are they just going to all of a sudden get it right? Or maybe say, do you think like 1/3? Dang, I wasn't expecting that big. But like, do you think that there's really people that don't even realize they're not on a compliant ELD, that they truly, assume positive intent? How many of that 1/3 are out there because they really want to cheat? And how many of them, pick someone off the registry?
Yeah, I think it's probably, to get even deeper, if you're talking about legitimate, I need to find an ELD where I can manipulate the logs, it's probably 1 in 5. It's probably 20%. If you're talking about people who are on a fraudulent provider who may not even realize it, and they're editing things that they think are legal, but they're actually not, that's probably a third.
Well, and Karen, to your point, I wonder how many people, as the years went by, they didn't intend to cheat 5 or 6 years ago, but felt like they had no other option when rates were so depressed, and they knew folks were running 150 to 180,000 miles a year on a solo truck when compliant carriers were struggling to get to 100,000. I'm sure some of those folks would willingly go back to a legitimate ELD, but not until the landscape has changed.
But if we put that together with what we have on the non-domiciled CDLs, that's 7% of the current capacity, over and above the whole thing with the non-domiciled and things like that. So, just watching this registry continue to shrink in 2026 with no new approvals, I truly wonder what that's going to do, come 2027.
Yeah, it's a great point. Here's what I think happens long term. Realistically, if you look in Canada, there's 20 Canadian-based providers, there's 20 US-based providers certified in Canada, and there's one certified from the Cayman Islands, I think. But regardless, I don't think the Canadian ones get certified in the US. So that leaves 20 providers that have been certified in the US, that are from the US, been certified in Canada. So if someone has asked me before, how many do you think, if we get to a third-party certification, how many unique providers do you have in the US? I think it's under 25. Now, that's unique providers. That's not registries on the FMCSA list because of white labels, because of people using someone else's product, which is a legitimate business practice, right? That is a big portion of our business, right? Through resellers, through people who have established businesses with trucking companies and they want to run their own ELD. We provide them with our compliant product. They, call it their own product. So there is a legitimate business practice there, but I bet it still ends up less than 100, even after you consider the white labels at that point.
I appreciate you sharing that insight. You had called out the $20 to $40 price range of saying, hey, this is the average. If you're paying $100, it's not because you're a 5-truck fleet. It's because you invested in a company that's fraudulent. Is there any other signs to someone who thinks they're doing things right that they should be able to identify that? And
I think the key word is flexibility. If anybody's offering flexibility, that's kind of the buzzword for ELD providers that are doing it the wrong way. If it's very glaring as their first advertisement is, come with us, we offer extreme flexibility and with your logs. That's the word.
As a provider, just simply the questions that you get from a carrier about what can I do can tell you exactly what their intention is, right? I would presume, I would venture to say if you would poll the providers, the good ones, they could tell you exactly which carriers are asking the feature questions that may indicate what their intentions are.
Yeah, I mean, the number one question, can I edit my log? Okay, well, what does that mean? Yes, you can edit your log. That's part of the law. Well, can I edit automatic driving? No, you can't. It's part of the law. Well, can I adjust or say that I was in personal conveyance? No, you can't, because that's part of the law. So there are very specific questions, to your point, that are just like, yeah, well, we know this guy's looking for something.
And are those not just validation parts of if those features are available? I mean, look, this is technology, right? It can do certain things and it can't do certain things. It's built around a requirement that's in there. An easy test, not a $5 million investment to keep up with what the government is telling me that I have to do, but that's a simple feature test. I mean, again, give a few days and you can have AI build the validation set for that to make sure those things can't be happen.
Absolutely. And as I said earlier, it's a commodity. I mean, ELD is a commodity at this point. The rules are so specific that every ELD provider out there has to follow the same framework. The biggest thing that differentiates us that we think from our competitors is the service, right? That if my driver does have a legitimate question, how do I use split sleeper berth? He can call our 24/7 support line and talk to somebody who understands transportation and walk them through it. Not walk them through how to cheat the system, because we don't allow that, but walk them through how to use every single item in the HOS rules. I mean, that's something that we don't see even from legitimate providers. They're not experts on the HOS rules. I mean, everybody seems to always forget the HOS rules haven't changed. The hours of service rules are the same. The only difference is it went electronic. So if you knew them before when you were on the log books, you should know them on the ELD side.
Yeah, and you could debate. Yeah, you could debate whether the rules are right or not right or whatever. But that's a separate thing. If those rules are in place, you got to have technology that follows those and lets people produce what they're using it for.
What I really think about is, we've had this come up in other conversations, Jeffrey, the role of private enterprise and how it moves faster than government regulation. But once this ELD reformation is more fully underway, or we've actually landed at a certain place with third-party certification companies, I can envision a day where shippers, freight brokers, and insurance underwriters are actually asking, which ELD company are you using? Now, with 1,000, there's no way to know the good ones from the bad ones. But if we get to a place where there's under 25, and I would argue maybe 10 or 11, think about, we don't have 25 cell phone companies. And that is a big profitable business versus the commodity-like element of ELDs. But I do envision that day. I mean, what do you think about that statement?
I think you're spot on. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I mean, I think that's a great comparison too. I think the cell phone comparison is a great comparison. I mean, you have some of the smaller providers out there that try to compete against the Verizons and the AT&Ts, and they probably do pretty well, but it's a great example. And it's compliance, right? I mean, a lot of the language that I'm sure you guys are aware is also up for interpretation. So we have regular dialogue with the FMCSA where their interpretation may be something different than we interpreted because the law is not clear. So even things like that, I mean, how could you possibly manage that with 1,000 different providers and everybody's interpretation? Yeah. 25 is my guess. Yeah, maybe it ends up being 10, 15. Unknown. But we got to get third-party certification first. Until we get them to announce that and go down that path and say, this is what we're doing, we're going to be stuck in the same spot we're in.
And look, the number doesn't matter as long as those are valid providers, right? Competition is what breeds this country, and if they're doing it the right way, that's what we want in the space.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Jeffrey, president of Assured Telematics, has been our guest. If you want to check out his website, there's actually two companies with similar names. Don't pick the one that starts with www, but pick the one that's https:////line//line and then Assured Telematics, and you can learn about his company. But to access today's podcast as well as our full library, go to the centspermilepodcast.com, also freightwaves.com. We're also on YouTube. And be sure to like us, make a comment. If you've got suggestions for future topics, we would certainly welcome that. And once again, on behalf of everyone today, thank you, Jeffrey, for joining us, and everyone have a great day.